Hi guys, this is Mohit from Indian iOS Guru, and this is our 10th video of our Learning to Build iOS Apps with Swift series. And in today's video, we'll be learning all about classes and structures in Swift. So classes and structures allow you to lay out the blueprint of your application's structure. Classes and structures can have properties and methods added to them to enhance functionality. So as compared to other programming languages, structures are very different. For starters, structures can have their own set of properties and methods and can even have their own initializers, which is not the case in a language like C. Structures in Swift can also be extended and can also conform to protocols. So let's look at the declaration syntax. Classes are introduced with the class keyword and structures are introduced with the struct keyword. So for example, we can say struct dimension, and I'm going to put in three members of this structure, which is a variable width initialized to 0, a variable height initialized to 0, and a variable ppi initialized to 0. So similarly, I can also create a class. I'll say class photograph, and I can create properties for this class. So I'm going to say var dimension with a small d is equal to an initializer to the dimension struct. I can say var name of type string optional, and I can say var is grayscale equal to false. So you can see in this example, we have a structure called dimension and a class called photograph. Okay, I have spelling mistake. Yeah. So we have a structure called dimension and a class called photograph. The structure has three stored properties called width, height, and ppi. So stored properties are basically constants or variables that are stored as part of the class or structure and are generally initialized with an initial value. The three properties are inferred to be of type int because they are initialized to 0. The class photograph also has three stored properties. The dimension property is initialized to a new dimension structure instance using the initializer syntax. The name property is initialized to nil as it is a string optional, and the is grayscale property is inferred to be of type boolean because it is initialized to false. Let's talk about creating instances. To create instances of classes or structures, we can use the initializer syntax. We have already seen how to initialize a structure in this example. So to initialize a class and save an instance of it, we use a very similar syntax. So let's say let some photograph is equal to photograph. So we have initialized an instance of the photograph class and stored it in a property photograph, and you can see the output here. The nested set of curly brackets are for the structure, for the dimension structure, where the width, height, and ppi are initialized to 0. The nil is for the name, and the is grayscale is set to false. So this is the default initializer syntax, and we will in a later video see how to create custom initializers as well. So interacting with properties. We can start interacting with properties after we have created an instance of the class or structure. We use the dot syntax to interact with properties. So for example, we can say println the width of the photograph is some photograph dot I access the dimension, and from within the dimension I access the width. And you can see it says the width of the photograph is 0. I can say height is again some photograph dot dimension dot height. PPI is some photograph dot dimension dot PPI. Name is some photograph dot name. And grayscale is some photograph dot is grayscale. So let's observe the output. So you can see it's printing out the width of the photograph is 0, height is 0, PPI is 0, name is nil, and grayscale is false. So this is how we get the properties. We are just getting the value stored in properties. So this is called getting the properties. And now let's look at setting the properties. So to set the values of the properties, we use the dot syntax to access the property first, and then we use the equal to operator to set the value into the property. So we can say some photograph dot dimension dot width is equal to 640. Some photograph dot dimension dot height equals 960. Some photograph dot dimension dot PPI equals 72. Some photograph dot name equals wallpaper dot jpg. And now if I just copy this line and paste it again, let's observe the output. So you can see the actual values are now being printed out. The width of the photograph is 640, the height is 960, PPI is 72, name is an optional, and grayscale is false. So if we want to access the actual value stored in the name property, we can use the forced unwrap operator, that is the exclamation mark. And if you look at the name being printed out is the actual value which is being stored in the property. So one thing about structures in Swift is that all structures by default have a member-wise initializer, which can be used to create and initialize the struct in one line of code itself. So let's say, for example, I want a new struct which is full HD. So I can say is equal to dimension, and I can use this member-wise initializer where I initialize the width to be 1920, the height to be 1080, and PPI to be 326. So this member-wise initializer is applicable only for structures, and is not available for classes. Another thing, very important thing to note is that structures and enums are passed by value. So this basically means that if structures or enums are passed around from one object to another or passed as arguments to functions, the value of the structure or enum will be copied and all operations will be performed on the local copy. So for example, let's say I have a variable called modified full HD is equal to the existing full HD structure, and here I say modified full HD dot width is equal to 1200. Okay, and you can see in the output that the actual structure full HD is still remains with its original set of values, that is 1920, 1080 and 326, but the modified full HD now has a width of 1200. So this is a separate copy and we are not working on the same structure, we are working on two different structures. So classes, on the other hand, are passed by reference. So when instances of classes are assigned to a new constant or variable or passed as an argument to a function, they are not copied, but instead a reference to the existing instance is passed. So for example, let's say I have let another photograph equal to some photograph, and if I say another photograph dot name is equal to swift dot png, and if I say println some photograph name is, I'll say some photograph dot name, and since it's an optional I'll force unwrap it, and I'll say another photograph name is another photograph dot name, and since it's an optional I'll force unwrap it, and let's observe the output. So you can see that the name of some photograph has now changed to swift.png. It's no more wallpaper.jpg that we had assigned before, and also the name of another photograph is swift.png. So classes are passed around as reference. The variable that we have created, another photograph, is pointing to the same reference in memory, so both the references are the same, and therefore both of them are printing the same value since instances of classes are passed by reference. Now let's talk about identity operators for classes. Since classes are reference types, it is possible that multiple constants or variables in our code are pointing to the same reference. So there are special identity operators for classes that help us determine if multiple constants or variables are pointing to the same instance. So for example, we can say if some photograph is equal to another photograph, we will print out both point to the same instance. And similarly, we can say if some photograph is not equal to another photograph, we can say print ln both are pointing to different instances. Obviously, this if is not going to get executed because here we are making it point, we are making both of them point to the same reference. Oops, print ln. Yeah. So this was all about classes and structures in Swift. Hope you have enjoyed this video. The code to this video will be hosted on GitHub, and the link will be shared in the bottom of in the description of this video. Also, head over to my website indianios.guru to have a Q&A session based on the videos that we are posting. So see you guys on the website.